Helen and Eugene had been married for 3 years. In the beginning, things were amazing, like really magical. They were head over heels for each other, constantly trying to squeeze in every spare moment together. But eventually, the honeymoon phase faded, and reality crept in. Everyday chores, tiny arguments over nothing, and the slow, awkward process of adjusting to one another's habits. Honestly, it would have been manageable if not for the slow shift in Helen's heart. It all took a turn one evening. They were out for a walk when a car pulled up beside them. A group of guys inside started hitting on Helen, right there, in front of her husband, like Eugene didn't even exist. She waited for him to react, to step in, to say something that showed he had her back. But all he did was calmly ask them to leave. No anger, no sharp words, just polite dismissal. Once the car finally disappeared into the distance, Helen turned to him, fuming. "Why didn't you stand up to them? They were blatantly flirting with me while you stood there doing nothing," she snapped, her voice tight with frustration. "Helen, there were 4 of them, and I was alone. If I'd gone after them, it wouldn't have been a fair fight," Eugene said quietly. Helen scoffed under her breath. A real man, sure, she thought bitterly. From that moment on, little things started grating on her nerves. He'd crack yet another unfunny joke, leave the trash sitting in the bin again, or park himself in front of the TV for hours instead of helping out or talking to her. Bit by bit, the admiration she once felt began to fade, and with it, her respect. Eugene, meanwhile, had no clue what was going on. He couldn't understand why Helen had become so distant, so cold. Nothing major had happened, at least not in his eyes. And since she never brought up anything specific, he just chalked it up to hormones or maybe lack of sleep. But before long, things started to feel even more off. Helen began coming home later and later, brushing it off with vague mentions of meeting friends. Then one morning, over breakfast, Eugene asked, "So, what are you up to after work today?" "Seeing Kate," she replied curtly, barely lifting her eyes from her coffee. Like answering him was some kind of chore. "I was thinking we could catch a movie together." He trailed off, the sting of her tone hitting him harder than he expected. That same evening, Helen showed up ridiculously late from a party, or at least, that's what she'd said. Eugene, growing more anxious by the hour, finally tried calling her. No luck. Her phone was off. Uneasy, he decided to call Kate, the friend Helen claimed she'd be with. "Eugene, why are you calling so late?" Kate whispered, clearly trying not to wake anyone. "The kids are already asleep." "Is Helen with you?" he asked, puzzled. "Helen? No, we haven't seen each other in a couple of months," she replied, sounding just as confused. "I really can't talk right now. Let's catch up later." Click. The call ended. Well, isn't that something, Eugene thought, a pit forming in his stomach. She tells me she's going to Kate's, but Kate has no idea about it. Either she doesn't care if I find out, or she never expected me to check. About 30 minutes later, Helen finally walked through the door. Eugene was waiting, arms crossed, eyes hard. "Oh, did you try to call me?" she asked casually, setting her purse down. "Sorry, my phone died. Forgot the charger." "I called Kate," he said flatly, watching her face for a reaction. "Let's see how the liar plays this one." She blinked, feigning surprise. Then her eyes drifted downward, as if she were suddenly deep in thought. "Wait a minute. Do you mean boring old Kate or her new namesake?" she asked with a sly grin. "Which one did you call?" Of course, he thought bitterly. How could I forget she's got a couple of friends with the same name? And now that I've warned her, she's got all the time in the world to come up with a story. Still, she'd managed to sidestep it this time. "Give me your phone. I'll charge it," Eugene said through clenched teeth. Without protest, Helen handed it over and headed to the bedroom to change out of her clothes and wipe off her makeup. While she was in the bathroom, Eugene sat tensely with her phone in hand, waiting for it to boot back up. As soon as the screen lit up, he dove into the call logs, outgoing, incoming, anything that might explain where she'd really been that night. Nothing suspicious showed up in the phone logs. Calls to friends, someone from work, her mom, sisters. No unfamiliar names or shady contacts. The messages were just as straightforward. But it can't all be in my head, Eugene thought, feeling that nagging doubt grow stronger. He knew it was time to dig deeper. The next day, he requested a detailed call statement from Helen's phone provider. And that's when a curious pattern emerged. A recurring number that didn't appear anywhere on her phone's call log. In other words, Helen had deliberately deleted all calls from this particular contact. Eugene pulled up the photos linked to that number in her messaging apps. The face looked oddly familiar. After a moment, it clicked. Jared, her coworker, the one she'd worked closely with for years. Without hesitation, Eugene called Jared and asked to meet. To his surprise, the guy agreed without batting an eye. Could it be that Eugene was mistaken? Maybe Jared wasn't involved with Helen after all. When the two men met that evening, Eugene cut straight to the point, asking about Jared's relationship with his wife. Wait, she hasn't told you yet? Jared's genuine surprise was unmistakable. You mean she didn't tell me? Eugene asked, feeling his irritation grow. I thought you knew, Jared replied. No, it's not like that, Eugene replied, puzzled. Then listen, she told me that everything is over between you. She said she would tell you about our relationship soon, and that you would break up. I made it clear that our relationship wasn't a secret, and it all started after she mentioned the divorce. Despite the heavy situation, Eugene couldn't help but chuckle bitterly. So what does that mean? Turns out she lied to both of us, told me she was faithful, and you, that she was practically free to move on. Jared came to Eugene's house that evening. When they were at home, Helen was in the kitchen cooking something. Hey, honey, I have a guest. We need to talk, Eugene called out from the doorway. Helen's shock was palpable when she saw her husband and lover standing side by side. She tried to act like everything was normal, but Jared shattered the illusion. Did you lie to me? Did you say anything to him? His voice cracked with pain. About what? Helen stammered, desperately pretending to be clueless. Let me spell it out for you, Eugene said coldly. You've been caught in a double lie, lying to me as your husband and to your lover, who thought everything was settled. Now, you're packing up and leaving. You don't even need to come back, Jared added firmly. And don't bother trying to come near me anymore.